Dr. Vivian Balakrishnan, Minister for Environment and Water Resources, Mr. Tangi Pao, Chairman of the PUB, Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you here to the launch of the Singapore Water Story. I can see this is a very serious group here. Just relax, it's going to be a nice afternoon here. As you know, some of you have been to the school before, that whenever I come to the podium, I have a rule of the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy where I only make 3 points. And my 3 points today is firstly about the Singapore water story, number 2, the global water story, and number 3, the Lee Kuan Yew School and water. For the first point, the Singapore water story, I just want to begin by saying that on the basis of very deep personal experience, I know how important this story is to Singapore. I mean, some of you know I served as a diplomat for 33 years in the Singapore Foreign Service, including, by the way, for 3 years I served as Deputy Chief of Mission of the Singapore High Commission in Kuala Lumpur. And I can tell you that by far the most delicate issue clearly in Singapore-Malaysia relations was the water story, and we also knew that this was not another subject of bilateral negotiations. This was a life and death issue for Singapore. And if at that point in time anybody had even said that the day might come in the future when Singapore could be independent in water supply, it would have been dismissed as a pipe dream. But that pipe dream may now become a reality, and that's why this story, the Singapore water story, is so important. And here I really want to thank the 3 authors, all of them affiliated with Lee Kuan Yew School, Cecilia, Yuga, and Nasid, for doing this brilliant job of putting together this book. Then my second point is about the global water story, and I think you all know that all over the world there's this rising concern about water challenges. In fact, one of the cliches that came out recently is that the future wars will not be oil wars, they'll be water wars. And that all over the world, new cities are emerging, mega cities are emerging. In fact, by 2025, 21 of the world's 37 mega cities will be in Asia. So what Singapore has done in its water story is really not just important for Singapore, but for the world as a whole. And again, this is a great service that Asid, Cecilia, and Yugal have done. And I'll never forget that Asid's big advice to all of us, and I hope I don't take away your punchline, Asid. His punchline always is that there's no scarcity of water in the world, there's a scarcity of good public policies on water in the world. And so that, I think, is very sound advice, which is why this brings me my third point, which is that this is why the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy has decided, as you know, to set up the Institute of Water Policy. It was led very ably by Dr. Sitaram, a colleague of Bindu Lohani from the Asian Development Bank for many years. And now I'm very pleased that Dr. Dennis Wichens has taken over as the new director. We actually believe that the Institute of Water Policy can do an enormous amount of good for Singapore, for region, for the world. And this is why we set it up. And if you allow me to end with a small commercial, if any of you are looking for a good cause to support and you have some checks you want to give away, please consider the Institute of Water Policy of the Lee Kuan Yew School also. So with those opening remarks, I believe after this the program will continue, and I will turn it over to our MC. Thank you very much, and welcome again to this launch.
Thank you, Dean. I would like to now invite a few of our honoured guests to say a few words. First,
Institute of Water Policy. It's very nice to see so many people here to celebrate this very nice event regarding the Singapore water story. And I'd like to talk for just a minute how a water story is also a story about people. It's about people, for sure, those folks who actually made the Singapore water story unfold. Those people such as Mr. Lee and his colleagues, who had the vision and determination and the commitment to really make the water situation what it is today for Singapore. Because they could see long ago that if Singapore were to be this bright, thriving city that it is, we would need to have a safe, clean, affordable, and very sustainable water supply. And they saw it through. The water story is also about all of us who consume water. We enjoy water in recreation and in our households, and we also put it to work for our livelihoods in many cases. And so a water story is really about people as well. In fact, behind every glass of clean drinking water, along every stream, up and down the reaches of every river on the planet, there are people. There are people much like you and me. Some who live in bright, shining cities, such as Singapore. Many more who live in small cities and towns around the world who have fairly good access to water. Very good, reliable supplies. Yet there are many million more, perhaps 800 million or so, who live in deep inner cities or slums or in informal settlements, or they live in rural villages where they have to walk many kilometers per day to cobble together a water supply from so many different sources. Many of these people who today still don't have access to reliable and safe water suffer the deprivations of not having access to water and sanitation. We still lose about 7 million children below the age of 5 every year due to very preventable diseases, some of which are caused by lack of access to clean water and sanitation. This is the 14th time we have gathered to celebrate World Water Day within this 21st century. The 21st century. A time when I was growing up, although it seemed like the 19th century now, I think I was growing up only in the 20th century, but the 21st century sounded like such a time of high technology and easy living, just as we do have to some degree here in Singapore and many other cities. But for much of humanity, it's still a struggle. When I knew I was going to be speaking today, I figured I better get onto Amazon.com and have a look at that there Singapore water story book so I could become prepared. While I was there, I thought, well, why not have a look and see if the South Asia water story book is available as well? But no, said Amazon, cannot. The South Asia water story isn't written yet. Won't be done until maybe 2037. My goodness. I said, well, can you tell me what price the book would be? And they said, no, we really can't, but we know that the South Asia water story will cost at least a few $1 billion to make happen. Not to be deterred, I said, well, how about the Africa water story? Is that book available yet? No, it cannot. Going to have to wait till 2048. And again, we don't know the price, but we know the cost is going to be pretty high. My friends, I don't know about you, but I don't really want to wait around until 2037 or 2048. In fact, I might not have the opportunity to wait around until 2048 for both the South Asia water story and the Africa water story to unfold. That's why we in the Institute of Water Policy, with very generous funding support from Singapore's Public Utility Board, are working very hard now to take the lessons and take the knowledge that we have gained from Singapore's water experience to extend it around the world. We're working in countries of Asia where folks don't have good access to water supply yet. We're working in North Africa as well. Again, trying to help those who are less fortunate than us to gain access to clean, safe water supplies, so we can take down these rates of child mortality. We can bring people better livelihoods. We can empower people to spend less time per day fetching water supplies from sources, some which are clean, some which are not, some which are affordable, some which are not. We have lots of work to do, and so I'd like to encourage all the students in the room in particular to continue studying these topics that you find so interesting and are so vitally important in the water sector and elsewhere. We still need to learn more about the science of water, the economics of water, and of course the policy settings in which we work with water as well. What a better place to be speaking about all of this than in a public policy school. Because we continue to believe and we continue to be motivated by the fact that, again, water stories aren't just stories about the water resource itself, but indeed they're stories about people. Because behind every glass, along every stream, up and down the rivers of the reaches of every rivers on the planet, there are people, people much like you and me, for whom a bright, shining water story has not yet unfolded. Come join us in our effort. We have lots of good work to do together. Come join us. Keep studying hard. help us find solutions, and help us extend this wonderful Singapore water story to many more towns and villages and cities around the globe. Thank you so much for joining us on this day when we celebrate this wonderful Singapore water story, and let's all have a very nice afternoon. Thank you very much.
Amazed by the ability to put together such a fine afternoon, including a torrential rainfall as we walked into the building. Now that takes, I don't think we could do that in the UK. Water, water everywhere, nor a drop to drink. Those words were written by the English poet Samuel Taylor Coleridge in 1798. And whilst there may be a rather obvious link to the rhyme of the Ancient Mariner and the subject of this book, there is also another more subtle one. In the very same year that Coleridge penned those words, Mr. Richard Taylor, who couldn't be with us this evening, started the publishing company that would become Taylor and Francis. And at that time, when Richard Taylor established his publishing company in London, a young Stamford Raffles was just beginning his career at the British East India Company. And barely 2 decades later, Raffles was laying the foundation of one of the most extraordinary places on earth, Singapore. But the story of Singapore since 1965, when it became nation status, is even more extraordinary, and one which many nations look to for guidance, from the small island states facing similar geographic problems to the most powerful nations on earth. I remember when I first came to Singapore many years ago, I was amazed that Singapore, with all its finery and all its excellence, is still smaller than a small holiday island we have in England called the Isle of Wight. Such an amazing difference. On the 200th anniversary, it's all right, I'm not going to go from 1798 year by year, we're okay. On the 200th anniversary of our founding in 1998, we actually established an office here in Singapore in order to better reach out to the academics in Singapore and in the region to recognise the role that this country plays in being that knowledge hub in Asia. And at TNF, we're very proud of our 2 centres of publishing and the way in which we've supported those academics to be able to do things like today. So in 2011, we were delighted to be able to acquire Earthscan, a publisher of respected books on sustainability and environmental issues. And that's why we're here to launch a book that probably more than most typifies the kind of publisher that is truly sustainable, because it focuses on one of the most desperately important issues that humanity faces, that of water resources. Singapore will, in just a couple of years, be celebrating its 50th birthday, a half-century of independence. I don't know about you, but I wish I could look forward to my half-century rather than looking back to it. But anyway, in 2019, we'll be celebrating the bicentenary, the founding of the modern city-state. Singapore's history is perhaps much older, and its future, like any nation-state, is not entirely assured. But there is perhaps no better example of the meeting of history and a rather insecure future for some than the Singapore water story. That in itself, that should make it compelling reading for all of those of us who are actually concerned about how to tackle a perfect storm of political, economic and environmental issues that confront all of our societies today. Back in England, I lived by the River Thames, and over Christmas period I kind of lived in the River Thames. Water doesn't seem to be an issue, and finding it is what to do with it. But any casual visitor to Singapore caught in a torrential rainstorm may wonder that with water everywhere, there must be plenty to drink. Well, reality, of course, is not quite so simple as that. And one foundation of Singapore's success has been its canny management of precious water, and by extension, the management of its environment generally. It took men of vision such as Lee Kuan Yew to focus people's minds on the importance of that and on the problems of water resources back in the early days of Singapore's independence. The environment is likely to be one of the most contentious issues that will face society in the decades ahead. And at TNF, for our part, we will remain committed to bring to the public domain important books such as the Singapore Water Story. Thank you.
On behalf of the Fairworld Center for Water Management, I would like to extend to all of you a very warm welcome to the launch of the book on the Singapore water story, Sustainable Development in an Urban City-State. In 2006, the United Nations Development Program invited our center to contribute to the Human Development Report, which focus was on water that year. For this report, I was personally responsible to prepare and coordinate 20 case studies on different aspects of water management with experiences from all over the world. One of the case studies was on best practices of urban water and wastewater management at the global level, for which one of the cities we thought about was Singapore. We contacted the then Chief Executive of the Public Utilities Board, Mr. Kuteng Chai, whom we didn't know at that time. We explained to him the objective of our study, and we asked him if he could provide us with data and information which could help us decide if Singapore could indeed be the focus of our study. Our analysis made us realize the outstanding performance of PUB and also the fact that Singapore has one of the best urban water and wastewater management records in the world. We carried out the study. This was included in the Human Development Report, posted in full in the website, and also later on published in the International Journal of Water Resources Development in its June 2006 issue. Given the achievements of PUB, we decided to nominate the board for the Stockholm Water Industry Award. Not surprisingly, the board was awarded this very prestigious prize. During the course of our study, there were two issues that intrigued us. First, how Singapore had managed to transform its very poor urban water management in 1965 to become one of the best in the world, only some years, within a short time span. Second, what were the enabling conditions and the overall environment that made this transformation, this remarkable transformation possible? Our view was that if we could answer these two questions objectively and satisfactorily, perhaps many other cities in both developed and developing countries would be able to learn lessons from the Singapore experience to improve the urban water management. The Singapore water story was the beginning of a very productive and enjoyable relationship between our center and many institutions of the city-state. The main ones, Public Utilities Board, the Ministry of the Environment and Water Resources, and the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy. During the process of this study, we became very enthusiastic of Singapore's water policies, management, development, governance, you name it, there is everything here. And how water policies became intertwined with its economic and social development. We also came across with a wide array of information, knowledge, insights on how the city-state's urban water management had evolved over the last 5 decades and how water had played a key role in its overall development. This book, which we have called the Singapore Water Story, is the end result of this research. Throughout the study, we have been impressed by Singapore's culture of long-term, visionary planning, pragmatic decision-making, and the extent to which political will has backstopped its many strategic initiatives as part of its truly relentless pursuit of progress. Commendably, in spite of being endowed with very few natural resources, the city-state has not seen its overall development thwarted. On the contrary, it has chosen and continuously tailored a path that has allowed it to grow and prosper. It has proven wrong all claims that such a small country would find it almost impossible to achieve so much, and in numerous areas, including that of water resources, within a short period of time. This book has been possible thanks to the support and collaboration of a large number of persons and institutions who contributed both directly and indirectly with their insights, experiences, comments, and support. We are most grateful to all of them for their generosity and for sharing their knowledge, expertise, and time with us, despite their busy agendas and numerous professional commitments. We would like to especially thank Mr. Chu Men Leong, Chief Executive of PUB, for the strong support we have received for the study. This has included access to data and information, organization of field visits, and most important, invaluable insights on water management in the city-state, as well as opening numerous doors for us to make personalities in Singapore, for us to meet many personalities in Singapore who contributed to this process. Now, at the beginning of this story, we were fortunate enough to have 2 sessions lasting some 3 hours with former Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew. We received from him a first-hand account to the countless difficulties Singapore encountered before and after its independence, and the reasons why the city-state took so many fundamentally early water-related decisions. His visionary approach, forward-looking views, and in-depth comments were instrumental for us to understand and appreciate the extraordinary efforts behind Singapore's transformation in its quest for sustainable development, and also the roles water has played in the transformation of the city-state. We are highly indebted to former Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew for giving us a clear picture of the social, economic, and political situations at different times in history. So the Singapore water story is an evolving story of resilience, innovation, resourcefulness, and determination, where water has played a key role in the overall development of the city-state, improvement in the quality of life of the population, and protection of the environment. We trust you will learn from this book, as we have learned, the myriad of lessons Singapore has to share with the world. Preparation of this book has taken a long journey, which is now over. 2 years of extensive and intensive research in Singapore, as well as in the National Archives of United Kingdom and Australia. On behalf of our center and of the 3 co-authors of the book, let me thank each one of the persons we met during this journey, without whose unstinted support, persistent encouragement, and continuous friendship, this book would not have been possible.
A very good afternoon or good evening, or a nice rainy evening to everyone down here. To be honest, I'm surprised to see so many of you here, despite the rain, or perhaps because of the rain, so you can't leave. Anyway, I'm going to comply with the 3-point rule of the Lee Kuan Yew School. And my 3 points are politics, economics, and technology. Let's deal with the first. On the 31st of August 2011, Mr. Tangi Paul and I were at the Gunung Pulai Dam, beautiful reservoir. We were there to hand over the water facilities in Sungai Tebrau, Skudai, Pontian, and the Gunung Pulai reservoir to the Malaysians. The 31st of August 2011 marked the expiry of the first agreement with Malaysia. At the end of the formalities, His Highness Sultan Ismail shook my hand firmly, looked me in the eye, and said, "Thank you for looking after this for me. Thank you for looking after this for me." I don't think you see that in any press report. But that sentence is pregnant with meaning. It was a reminder, a stark reminder, that our arrangements with Malaysia are temporary. That Malaysia owns the land, the river, the waters, and expects us only to look after it for them. The point I'm trying to make in the political sphere is that water has always been an existential issue for Singapore, especially the day that we got kicked out of the Federation. And that's why, in fact, the key element of the story here is involving a couple who are not present here today, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, and I would add also his wife, Mrs. Lee, because she took the precaution of inserting a clause to guarantee the 2 water agreements in the separation agreement, which led to ultimately the independence of Singapore. So that shows you what a fundamental political existential point water has been for us in the last 48 years. I've had the privilege of sitting in cabinet with Mr. Lee for 9.5 years before he left cabinet in 2011. And in that period, there was only once that I heard him raise his voice. Mr. Lim Chee On looks quizzically because I'm sure in the earlier years you would have heard him raise his voice many more times. But in those 9.5 years, I only heard him raise it once. Not very loudly, but enough to make a point. And it was about water. So I learned very early on that water is an issue which you don't take for granted. One advantage of having your back against the wall is that it focuses your mind. And one advantage of having a super water minister called Mr. Lee Kuan Yew is that water was never a project of a single ministry. I can quite honestly tell you that all 14 ministries in the Singapore government have a role to play in the water story. So one key political point is that it requires firm political resolve. It requires a very clear vision. It requires an integrated approach. And then it requires the ability to translate a story, a narrative, or plans into reality on the ground. And that's really the genius of the politics behind the water story in Singapore. My second point is on economics. We are probably one of the few countries in the world in which the politicians have had the audacity to say, we are going to charge our people full price for water. We're not going to subsidize the consumption of water. In fact, we're going to go more than that. We are going to charge our people the long-run marginal cost of the next available drop of water using the latest available technology which we currently employ. It's easy to string a statement like that which economists can understand and economists will support. But to be able to effect that in practice and to charge that and to explain to our people, that requires a tremendous challenge in a political arena. But more than that, it also illustrates Singaporeans' practical, common sense approach to this issue of water. The ability to right price water is also the reason why we can also give opportunities for private companies, both local as well as overseas, to enter our water arena because they know that we're good for our money and that in the water field, the ability to make long-term investments and to reliably expect revenue streams is crucial. It's about risk management for projects which will last 5 decades and beyond. So that's the point about getting the economics right. And yet, I'm always somewhat amused when I travel and you go to a hotel room and you see, oh, this is terrible, you see a bottle of water like this. Or if you go to the countryside, you see a woman, it's usually a woman, carrying a pot of water on her head. Or you see children having to draw water from a well. And the point I'm always reminded of is that the price that we charge for water at the tap in Singapore, full price, is 1,000 times cheaper than the price of water in a bottle. Do you realize the irony, the cruel irony of all that? That in fact, if you can get the politics and the economics right, you can full price water good enough to drink, and it is 1,000 times cheaper than bottled water, or worse, sacrificing the health and the mortality of millions of children every day in this globe. So the point is that getting the economics right is vital. My final point is on technology. In Singapore, we now depend on desalination and on recycling water. 10% desalination, another 25 to 30% of recycling. This would not have been possible 2 decades ago because reverse osmosis through membranes was not available at the cost-effective level which it is today. The point I'm making is that technological progress makes many things possible, but there is a special role or responsibility of governments to invest in R&D, to protect academia, research institutes, give them the support and the long-term support to continue to invest in research and development, and then for governments also to be a reference customer, to take ideas from the bench, to put it into a plant, and to be able to buy and pay good money for those products. That's how technological breakthroughs will occur, and we will continue to support R&D in water in Singapore, and people will know that we are a reliable reference customer. The other point about technology is that for the future, Singapore has to realize that in fact we have translated a dependence on water into a dependence on energy. Reverse osmosis requires energy. In other words, as long as you've got energy, you've got water. But that simply substitutes another strategic vulnerability for another. So the key challenge for us in the future will be how we manage energy, the production of energy, the cost of energy, the security of energy. And in fact, the paradox here, or the irony here, is that the same principles for the water story will also have to be applied for the energy story. Meaning, get the politics right, get the economics right, and always be prepared to support and use in a sensible and rational way the latest and best available technology. So I hope I've given you some food for thought with these 3 points. And I just want to thank the authors for putting this book together. I'm sure it'll become required reading for all future water ministers in Singapore. I hope in other parts of the world as well. But it is a wonderful effort. I'm sure all 3 of you enjoyed the interactions you had with Mr. Lee Kuan Yew. You spent 3 hours with him. This is a topic which we could all spend literally hundreds of hours on. And I think most of us in this room would not be born. So congratulations, and I wish you all the very best. Thank you.
Dr. Vivian Balakrishnan, distinguished guests and friends. Let me first make a confession. I am not a big fan of book launches. The first time I had the book launch was decades ago, December 1967. It was my first book, and it was a meeting of the American Association of Advancement of Science in Chicago, snowing outside, and I thought all the people that came to the book launch wanted a somewhere warm place to come and have a free drink. And this is my next. In 2013, in between, I've written 75 other books. None of them had book launches, and I suspect this will be my last book launch as well in my life. Singapore water story is an interesting one for us because water has become, rightly or wrongly, an important issue. Yesterday, I looked at Google and see how many entries I could get if I put the word water crisis. I hadn't Googled water crisis for at least 1 year. And I just wanted to see what has happened in 1 year. Well, yesterday, Google came out with 445 million items on water crisis, which is twice of it had a year ago. Then, as Dean Mogobani said, I put water wars, see what has happened. Again, I had not seen water wars a year until last World Water Day in Google. It had 188 million entries under water wars, which is more than double it had 1 year ago. So whatever it is, water crisis and water war is obviously a growth industry. And yet, as Kishore mentioned, there is absolutely no reason why any city, more than 200,000 people, anywhere in the world, could not have clean water 24 hours a day that can be drunk straight from the tap. Excuses are many. And the two biggest excuses are, we don't have enough water. Number two, we don't have money to pay for water. It's all very expensive. After decades of work looking into the various systems, I have come to the conclusion those are myths which our professionals, bureaucrats, and politicians in most countries like to propagate because no one wants to confront the truth. When we looked at Singapore water story, why did we start? The answer was very simple. Not only we wanted to see why Singapore had succeeded, but also we wanted to see, can somebody else do the same job as well? We wanted to look for success. We were not looking for crises. And today in my class, and I have a wonderful group of students, and they're all here because I threatened them if they don't come, their grades will be affected. I asked them, can you tell me which country has the highest water consumption in the world? And there were the usual suspects like US or Canada or things like that. The highest by far, and I say Singapore's, in my view, Singapore's consumption is quite on the high side, 152 liters per person per day. Highest by far now is 500 liters per capita per day. And would you believe where it is? In the Middle East. Dubai and Kuwait. And they tell me, when I go and Minister of Kuwait, they said, look, we have a big problem because we don't have enough water. And I say, if you're using 500 liters per capita per day, you are losing 40% of water from your system. Well, I think the problem is something different. We looked at Singapore. Why did it succeed? And like Dr. Balakrishnan, I'll just one name, Lee Kuan Yew. I've been advising 19 governments, including a few prime ministers and one king and umpteen water ministers. Not one prime minister, not one king is interested in water unless there's a flood or drought. The day the flood is over, the drought is over, water disappears from the political agenda until the next thing it comes. Look at Australia, 10 years drought. And I pray to God the drought had continued at least for one more year, because the Australians have made some tough decisions, and sadly at the 10th year, the rain came, torrential stuff, heaven opened up, and all the political will and the unanimity disappeared, and the thing is back to square one. So that is the problem. One is the political leadership is missing. And the reason Singapore is different, you had a prime minister for a long period of time who, because of his experience, looked at water as an important factor, and not when there was a drought or a flood, but he wanted to get reports on water many, many times. Why did Singapore River was cleaned up? Because I can tell you as a bureaucrat, as a former Director General of the Government of Canada, when your Prime Minister wants a report every month on his desk, and now you know he reads that report and asks some searching questions, it concentrates your mind wonderfully. And that's what Lee Kuan Yew did with the Singapore River cleanup. He wanted a report every month on his desk so that he sees what's happening. And once he realized that type of support, no wonder Singapore has such a beautiful water story. And the second item is what I have found in my discussions with all the leaders, many leaders of the countries and the international systems. I judge the leader not by his or her vision, because a leader can only do so much. I judge the leader by the group of people he or she has around him who can do the things that once the vision has been agreed to. And in Singapore, Lee Kuan Yew had a remarkable group of people who made that vision possible. When we talked with him, when we went to see him, we were threatened, be careful. He's a tough person. He's known to have cancelled interviews halfway through thinking this is wastage of time. So we went completely worried. Siciliano went to see him, apprehensive to sit before this great man. I have to tell you, within 4 or 5 minutes, we forgot we were talking to Lee Kuan Yew. He was warm, he was witty, he was frank. He told us bluntly, these are some things you got to know in order that you understand what the situation was in 1965. But these are not for quotation, this is for you to understand the framework. Except that you can use whatever we say, whatever he says. Then at the second interview, we decided we'd like to dedicate the book to him, because we felt without his support and leadership, Singapore would not have achieved so much. So we told him, we'd like to dedicate the book to you. He smiled. He said, you know what? You don't need my permission to dedicate the book to me. You can dedicate to anybody you want. You don't need the permission. Then I said, no, we don't need your permission. We can dedicate to you or anybody else. But we want to make sure the book just does justice to your reputation and to your legacy, which is immense. Then he smiled again. He said, if you want to dedicate it to me, it will be my pleasure. So the book, we dedicated to him because we think without Lee Kuan Yew and that wonderful team he put around him, it would not have been possible. We, what we're trying to do now is, as I said, the world's water problem is solved. We're trying to find examples like Singapore, where problems have been solved. And within the next 2 years, we'll have a series of books coming out showing success stories, enabling environment. Instead of talking about the crisis, we're going to talk about solutions. How countries have done that. If I tell you right now, a city like Phnom Penh has a better water supply, Roger, than London Thames Water. Phnom Penh having a better water supply indicators than London or Los Angeles or Paris. Most people say you are crazy. It is not. How did they do it? So we want to find out these success stories. And these stories are coming out from different parts of the world, which sadly academia and the world doesn't know. So we're trying to find out why people succeeded, how they succeeded, how they have used water as an engine for growth. Indira Gandhi was one of my mentors. And I remember a discussion I had in 1981 with her. And she told me, look, I'm happy to see you anytime you want. But if you want to talk to me about efficient water management, I'm not the person. Go and talk to the Central Water Commission. They will know about those things. And I was horrified. Here was a prime minister, and I thought the sun rises and sets with water. I'm not interested in water at all. And then she said, it is how we put the issue. I'm not interested in water. But if you talk to me what water can do to reduce poverty, if you talk to me what we need to do so that we can use water as an engine for economic development, I'm interested. Those are issues, as a Prime Minister, I'm interested. But if you're talking about nitty-gritties of water management, I'm not interested at all. And then I realized from there on, unlike the rest of my professional colleagues, who think water management is the end, I learned from Indira Gandhi that no, that is not the end. It's just a means to an end. And the end is how do we improve the quality of life? How do we improve poverty? How do we use water for economic development? And the reason my colleagues say, how do you have access to the corridors of power in these countries? Because I talk the language politicians understand, and also language that is important. I'm not interested in efficient water management. What I'm interested in, how do we manage something so well so that your lifestyle becomes better, the people have a better living standard, and their expectations are met. I am pleased to say that Professor Lan, who is here, is translating the book into Mandarin. In 4 months' time, a Mandarin edition will be available, and I hope a few other things will be available. But it will be amiss of me not to thank two people. Cecilia has already thanked Chu and Leong. Mr. Chu, I don't want to embarrass you in public by telling you I have worked with probably 50, 60 of the best utilities manager in the world. None of them can hold a candle to you. And I'm a scientist, and I'm not a diplomat. I don't mince my word. If it wasn't good, I've said equally the opposite. You and your staff have been remarkably helpful. Without you, we could not have. We never had any pressure to change any of our analysis. I think that was, we were worried at the beginning that there will be pressure, that there will be some quid pro quo, that will give you the data, but you have to follow the party line. Unfortunately, as an academic, that is unacceptable. It's a one-way traffic. You give the data, we give you the analysis, we listen to your comments, but the analysis is ours. So the analysis is ours, and to their credit, PUB has not asked to change one word of the analysis. And I'm grateful that you did not put us in that awkward positions. I have no idea what we would have done had we faced that awkward position. Second, my good friend Valerio Nannini, thank you for your support. Nestle has been immensely helpful. In fact, throughout my career, I mentioned this will be our last book launch, but next week we'll be in Switzerland with the chairman of the board of Nestle to address the world's media. It will be a book launch on our next book, which is coming out on corporate social responsibility, which has nothing to do with water, but CSR. So we'll be discussing that on Wednesday. So thank you, Valerio, for your support, because as you know, I have no funds available for providing a small receptions, and thanks to Valerio, I thank you all of you, thank you on all our behalf for Nestle to support our receptions and your friendship. And finally, on a Friday afternoon, to find so many people here again, I really want to thank you for your support, for your friendship. The two the years we have spent off and on in Singapore has passed very soon. This is probably our last year in Singapore, but it's been a wonderful place to work, wonderful place with many memories, and a wonderful place to learn many lessons. I thought I had seen most of the things in life that has to be seen. No, we're just starting. And Singapore has been, as Cecilia said, a wonderful journey, and it will never end. It will continue. But thank you for making all these things productive. Thank you.
To give you a year-by-year account, I think it will last all night long. So let me just start.
I think they may be happy to stay all night long.
My first impression of water was in 1963, 64, 61 to 63. There was a serious drought here in Singapore, and water rationing. We started with zonal rationing, and then went on to island-wide rationing for a period of 10 months. It was unthinkable in those days not to have water for the larger part of the week for 10 months. Then I remember distinctly going up to KL to do my engineering studies, and the train was passing through Johor. And we crossed a bridge, and I saw a river, and I think it is the Tebrau River. And I saw cows grazing on Tebrau River. Tebrau River bed was dry, it was exposed, and there were cows grazing on Tebrau River. And I said, my goodness, when will all this ever end? Then the second significant event that took place that made a very deep impact upon me was 1965, just 2 years later, and we became an independent nation. In other words, cut off, you would say, from the hinterland when the water came from. And these two events made a very deep impression upon me, so that when the water story began with the first Water Master Plan in 1972, and I was privileged to join that team, it was a tremendous chance for me to really see the future that is ahead of us. The future was very bleak in those days. We only had 3 small reservoirs. The rest of the catchments were polluted. We thought about water recycling, water reuse. It was a dream, but we dreamt about it way back in 1972. Then we thought about desalting. There is a possibility, but the price was too high. But we were especially attracted to water reuse because we see that as the way ahead for Singapore. In water reuse, if you close the hydrological loop, the water loop, then you know in a feedback system, the gains are exponential. 1 plus 1 is not 2, or 1 plus 1 can be 3, 4, 5, depending upon the amounts that you recycle. In fact, if you recycle every drop, you don't need any injection of fresh water. Of course, that is impossible technologically. But that is the theory behind it of water reuse. And that was truly exciting. Today, it is even more exciting because we see some of these things that we dreamt about in 1972 coming to pass. Water reuse, water recycling, not a once-through reuse back into the sea, but a closed-loop kind of a recycling going on here in Singapore. Then we have desalting that is coming. The challenges ahead are back to square one, you would say. I go back to that day when I crossed the Tebrau River, I saw cows grazing on the Tebrau River bed, drought. Today the big challenge, once more, is climate change and the challenge of drought. And we are facing that once again, all over again. And I say, I'm very confident that my colleagues in PUB for generations to come will see us through. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
In this study. And there are many Singapore has made a lot of progress. PUB is an extraordinary agency. There are things that did caught our attention. One of them is that in Singapore there is the policy is based not on sectors, but it is defined at the national level. And as the minister said, there is a goal, there's a development goal, and then all the ministries work towards that goal, which doesn't happen elsewhere. Something else that is of course called our attention is the leadership, how strong it was, how strong it has continued to be, but most important, the fact that even having taken a decision, the wisdom was such that the decision was stopped, it was reversed, it was intervened, it changed. This principle of looking ahead, looking across and looking ahead has been applied in Singapore for many years, and it is a principle that also applies in the water sector. Thinking, of course, that we are not talking only about the water sector. This is not about water efficiency. This is about the goal of the city-state, that is to achieve certain development. The best would be, of course, sustainable development, economic growth, that we can fulfill the expectations of the people and that the environment is protected, that we have the green, clean, and blue, as these excellent books on environmental policy say. And for that, each part plays its own part. That is what is most amazing, that there is an overall goal, and all the institutions work towards that goal. Generally in the world, the cities and the countries follow this principle of let's pollute first and then let's clean later on. But not in Singapore, perhaps because there was not an option, perhaps because it's a land constrained, a water constrained country, but that was a fact. And this was against the overall wisdom that says that if we establish policies that are environmental policies that are very stringent, then industries may go away. Again, Singapore is showing that that is not the case. There are many industries here, and they comply because they have to comply. They know there is a rule of law. So there is this idea of establishing a city-state, that there is a legacy in terms of institutions, in terms of laws, regulations that are modified. And also that you attract the people, this principle of the public-private people sector. So you do have public participation in spite of many comments, you do have it, except at a different level. And that's what we also have to learn, that each country, each culture has its own principles and its own solutions. And Singapore has a lot to teach the world in terms of leadership, in terms of institutional capacities, in terms of ministries working together, and most important, towards the same goal. On the part of leadership, that's the most important part. Recognizing the role of each part, as Mr. Lee Kuan Yew told us. There was a leader, there was a group, but we would not have been able to do anything if we had not brought the people along with us. So again, there is partnerships, there is collaboration, there is cooperation. So there are many lessons to learn from Singapore, but these are the ones that call our attention.
Thank you. That was excellent, Cecilia.
And our operations in the water sector is about 2 billion a year. So this is a business, something we do in about 48 developing countries. When we go to the developing countries, one of the things we have to go is assess their water situations before we can make any investment. And then we ought to be able to tell them what to do. I've been on and off involved with the PUB and trying to understand its work. When you look around the Asia-Pacific region, there are many times, almost all the times, we look at the Singaporean experience and see how we can take them. And sometimes tell the government, sometimes pardon me by not saying this is from Singapore. Sometimes we say this is the best practice to do it. And there are countries who've done it. And there are 3-4 things that comes very clear. One which has been said over and over again is the leadership and commitment. Sometimes we do go and talk to the ministers or the prime minister that tell them we have a 5-year plan on the water. This is what we want to do. And there are other times when you go and talk to the utilities who look like very good people who can actually do the same. Sometimes the vision is there is no implementation, and there are people who are the implementation, there is no vision. And I think therefore the Singapore story is very useful for us to tell to the governments that the leadership and commitment at all levels is important. At all levels. People who will be able to see it, people who will be able to implement, like the implementation will be the PUB, the vision would be the highest level which has been mentioned many times here. The second approach, which again the minister rightly mentioned, is the integrated approach. The water ministries, this is not new in many countries, the water ministry will not think of the energy, they won't even think about the irrigation, the water supply won't do the housing. So this is one type of problem you continue to have to look at the integrated approach. The second type of problem that we see is to look at this within the water sector, but not looking at comprehensively. You have the agriculture water, of course it's not very relevant in Singapore, and many other big countries where we work the agriculture water, the water for drinking, the rural water supply, urban water supply, drainage, even flood water, so on and so forth, need to be able to look at them holistically. Again, the Singapore approach becomes very, very useful, including in the recent years. I know you've been, as the minister rightly said, the energy-water nexus. And we stress that in bigger countries where we work, the energy, water, and food nexus. So it is not so much relevant here in the urban situation, but in many countries, those energy, water, food, and environment becomes another way of looking at the integrated approach. The third area is the most difficult one, which is how to tell to the people that water is not a one-time commodity you drink and then it's disposed of. Often we have this discussion at the head of the state level, look, we do have alternative to energy, but you don't have alternative to water. So how to turn this into a reused water, the 3 R's which have been mentioned before briefly, the reuse, reduce, reuse, recycle. And there is a cost to that, but where you have a problem, I think the technology is a solution sometimes, but one has to keep on working on that. There's an awareness part to this, which was mentioned before. I went one time to my children's school many years ago to give a talk on water. And I said the same thing that I'm saying it now. Look, there is no alternative to water. For energy, you have alternative. And one primary school kid, he raised the hand and says, no, I don't care about water. I can live on Coca-Cola. And the other guy, who was from the middle school guy, said, no, I don't care, I can live with beer. It took us time to tell them that, most of that Coca-Cola is water. Most of that beer is water. I think there's a little bit of that awareness which still is required at all levels. I think something you mentioned, somebody mentioned about the people's level. So that part also is to me important. The other part, the other thing that we tell people from the Singapore story is there's a lot of discussion in our bank, including in many other investment banks, public to private, we should all privatize what we do. Or we should do public-private partnership. It's very, very common. And I think Singapore provides a great model that the public sector can be as efficient, sometimes even more efficient than the private sector. So I'm a strong believer of it. When the public sector can demonstrate that, it becomes a benchmark for the private sector to beat it, if they can. So I think this is a very, very good message in the discussion that we have on privatization. The other point that I'll mention, which has been again mentioned by the Minister, the economics of it, the pricing the water. Right? This argument you hear everywhere, but without pricing the water, you don't have money for the investment, you don't have the operational maintenance, things like that. This is one of our biggest policy dialogue with every country we go to work with. You need to increase your talent and make it relevant so that you can sustain it. A very, very difficult discussion. Some projects have failed because of this, because if they don't do the right tariff, we don't do the project. Finally, I will mention a few words about, 10 days ago, we launched a book. I don't want to confuse on the books, but we do a study on which Ashit knows, Asian Water Development Outlook, every 2-3 years. You were involved in the first one, where the message is what Kishore said. There's enough water, but it needs to be managed. This year we look at the water security issue in the Asia-Pacific region. And when you look at about 49 countries, interestingly, 37 of them have water security issues. Water security, we put them in about 5 categories. One, of course, the household water, the water you need for your household, economic water security. some countries, some areas would not be able to grow economically, would not be able to go further because of the water. Third is the urban water security. Fourth is the environmental water security, which is pathetic in most of the countries because of the water quality issues. And finally, we look at the resilience to water-related disaster, which you briefly hinted in your speech. What we find, I might just mention one on 2 points. One on the urban. She mentioned the water losses, non-revenue water losses. And if you look at the reason, just like Rashid says, we always say Singapore, which is about 5% water losses here, I guess, non-revenue. Phnom Penh is about 6%. And then you go to Kuala Lumpur, it's about 33%. So if you plug that hole, there's plenty of money. We don't like to lend anymore to increase your capacity by 10%, 20% when you're losing 30%. This message is a very, very hard message to give in. Also, well, we started pricing not only for the water, I think we should start pricing for the health aspect, because the public health impact that it creates. Final word on the disaster side. One of the water security area we look at is the natural disaster. Whether it's because of the climate change, which is, in our mind, is having lots of impact in Asia-Pacific region. 90% of the people are affected by water-related disaster in Asia and the Pacific region. That's what our data says. And current cost of flood disaster in the region for 2011 became approximately about $61 billion. Only 5% of the disasters are insured, whereas in the developed countries, about 40% is disaster. And one of our research shows the losses due to disaster is increasing exponentially and much faster than the rate of growth in GDP. So that's another kind of concern we have on this one. But the attention paid by the government on this one is very, very limited. Just to give an example, when we had 2 typhoons in the Philippines, I see a Philippine ADB staff there from, they lost about 2.7% of the GDP. And if you have a population growth of about 3% and 2.7%, you probably are on a negative growth for the year. And Thailand had it at about 11% of the GDP. So I think this area of the disaster, it has to be looked into. Although the nature of the disaster you may find in Singapore and some other cities is different, but certainly needs to be looked into very, very carefully, because it seems to be having a huge impact on the economy as well as the lives. And Asia seems to have the highest number of people who have died because of natural disaster. When you take the global data, which is more than 50% in Asia.
The water should be free. They don't just think that water in the stream should be free. The water that's piped into your home should be free. And very few politicians dare to tell the people that, hey, water is not free. There's a cost to bringing the water from the stream to your home. Somebody's got to pay the cost. You got to pay the cost. And that's a very difficult political message. So that's one example of a bad policy, free water, that obviously is a problem. But if you think of Gipao or Cecilia or Bindu, of other examples of bad policies that can be reversed and then hopefully help to make the more soluble the water problem.
Yes, let me begin with just this. I want to repeat about the pricing. It's about planning. We need to make sure that even though we may not have the funds to implement today, but the planning process must be rigorous. That stretch of land or that area that is to be reserved for a sewage pipe, a drain, or a floodplain or a reservoir, it must be reserved. And all you need is 2 lines to draw on the plan and then force it. The minute you backtrack on this, you're creating future problems which is sometimes simply intractable, because buildings have been built on what was supposed to be a floodplain, or they're built too close and you cannot lay sewers in between them, and therefore you have a water pollution problem that you cannot resolve or too expensive to resolve. So from the planning point of view, just draw the 2 lines and safeguard that area for future water resources management issues. In that way, you will really lay the groundwork for the future. I'll give you a good example. The Bukit Timah Flood Elevation Scheme Phase 2, that huge canal that cuts from Swiss Cottage all the way to Sungai Kalang, that land was reserved in the 1940s.
1940s.
1940s. 2 lines were drawn. And
This
that
is
was
even before Singapore became
before
independent.
Singapore, yeah, by the British. Because they knew that Rochor Canal will be too small, the city has grown too close to it, and will be growing too close to it, and therefore they need to reserve the part of land. And it's been reserved all the way to today until about 10, 15 years ago, we built the Phase 2 diversion canal. So we need to just do that for the future. It doesn't cost us anything. When the time comes and you can implement it, you have the funds, it is available.
Thank you. Sylvia?
Thank you.
Bad policies.
Bad policies, the ones we have in terms of laws and regulations. Our countries tend to develop laws and regulations which are never implemented. They are not implementable. We have one example in China where the water quality we know is a main issue in the world. Water quality parameters have been increased from 15 to 106. So you increase the number of parameters, you list them by name, you have to establish your laboratories, your human resources, how you are going to keep the data collected, from collecting of the water to reliable means to analyzing it, and then finally what did you do with the data? So it's not a matter of saying, it's not a matter of saying I'm going to establish this regulation, and if you don't comply with it, then there will be fines. No. It's a matter, as Mr. Kandika was saying, of planning, even in terms of laws and regulations. You have to plan for what is feasible. You have to plan together with your industries and with your domestic sectors, with your agricultural sector, to see what you will be capable to do and within what timeline. And that's the main problem all over the world. I'm sure most of you know that we tend to have the wrong policies, the wrong laws, and the wrong regulations. And then we wonder why we are so bad. That's a good example.
Thank you, Kishore. When the Development Bank does a project, we have a matrix of the policies, which we say, this is not good, you should implement by such a period. We are champions of providing all kinds of policy that we consider bad. And there are many of these in the water area. First, agreeing with Mr. Tan, which is a simple one. Let's take an urban area first. In the urban area, one of the minimum things you would like to see is an urban plan. That everyone is respect. And that urban plan would include, among others, the water supply, the drainage, the sewerage, in some bigger cities, a drainage area for flooding area. Because sometimes it's also a good strategy to create some land for flood when it happens. Therefore, you don't have to worry about your flash floods and so on. And what we have problem in looking at this is these plans change that often. As the mayors come, they change. And the area we sometimes is kept for flood zone becomes a real estate property. So no wonder these people are now going to be flooded. Or because if it's a nice real estate, they don't get flooded. They put an embankment around them, they raise the level high, and the neighbors get flooded. I think this is really one of the biggest problems we find is the mayors after mayors, the plan keeps on changing. So you need a longer term person. It should be anchored at the level it should be changed. And the second thing, as again Mr. Tan said, is if you're going to be building, you build this much, 10 kilometers, 10 meters of water supply, you better build it to say that it will only have 5% losses. Why try to cover hundreds of meters and then you have 30%, 40% losses? So whatever you do at AAA. And I think this is something really need to be implemented. Third, most of the water supply systems, they don't care a damn about the quality. The public health. So what good is water when you can't drink? Is a point you were making. And I have research when I was in the academics once, she might recall, I did a study when we provide a rural water supply in one village. The water actually came to the house, but it got more contaminated. The treated water got more contaminated because there was no good sanitation. And the handling of the water wasn't good. You still had the bacteria. So when the children actually drank, they got more sick with the water. than before. So I think there's not trying to put the public health dimension to this. I'm glad you have the Ministry of the Water Resources together. Not many countries have that kind of arrangement. Looking at the public health dimension and the water quality is very, very important. And if you elevate the kind of discussions a little bit upstream, if you start looking at the whole river basin issue, then the whole water resources allocation, river basin management comes in. Now, as you tell me, you and I wrote many things about the river basin management before. We can't think of many, we can't even think one good river basin authority that has done both water, river basin resource allocation the way it should be done. So I don't know how many bad policies I can keep on giving you, but just to tell you that there are many.
Okay. So we may invite you back, Bindu.